Hello, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thank you for joining me for this IPA talk, and grateful to have for the first time our new State Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Tony Sanders. And Tony, when I think about you being new, I don't know when that label drops off here anymore. You've been at this for almost a couple of months now, right?
30 plus days, just a little over a month.
All right.
So
well, maybe we get to 60 and then we can drop that off.
I think the new label dropped off after week one because, we're in session, the Capitol's behind us, and I think that the new label dropped off pretty quickly.
So with some of the issues in particular that you're dealing with and all of that, for sure.
Absolutely.
You bet. So, Tony, I thought since this is, it's not that you're an unknown person here in the state of Illinois, obviously coming from U46, but still, even though people may be familiar with you, I thought it might be a nice opportunity if you're open to this, just to explore your background just a tad and maybe a little bit of your professional career, and then we'll get into school leadership and kind of your thoughts related to moving the agency forward here in just a bit. But let's just hear a little bit about yourself, anything that you might be comfortable sharing with people.
Absolutely. So I was not a traditional educator by training. That was not my original background. I actually went to school here in Springfield. We moved to Springfield, Illinois when I was 15. I went to school right down the street here at Springfield High School, graduated from there. And my dream, even though I was the son of two educators, right, my dream was to be a disc jockey. So I wanted to be the next Dr. Johnny Fever.
Right.
And so
Wolfman Jack, right? Something like that?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So I went to school to do I studied mass media. I went to Lincoln Land. I went to what is now University of Illinois at Springfield.
Right.
Back then it was
Sangamon State.
I'm so old. It was Sangamon State at the time.
I remember that
and studied mass media. In my last year of college, I actually did an internship and landed a job working full time at a local radio station. So my dream came true really early in life, and then I realized there was no money in radio, and it's really difficult to support a family.
For sure. Well, and you and I both share radio. I have a little of that experience. I have a face for radio. I won't put that descriptor on you. You can cover that for yourself. But
I have the same. I have a face for radio as well.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure. So worked with radio just a little bit, and then what?
So radio led me. Every summer I had worked in different state agencies just to earn a little bit of money. Everybody in Springfield tends to work for the state during the summer, and I was no exception. And so after my radio days came to an end, when I chose to seek out a different career path, I ended up being offered a full-time job in state government. So I spent 15 years with a variety of titles working in state government, from the Department of Professional Regulation to the State Health Department to the State Board of Education. Yeah. And I had titles ranging from appraisal specialist to public information officer to here I was the acting head of acting director of community relations and government relations. So
a short title then.
A short title.
Right.
It was a very short title.
So what exactly does an appraisal specialist do in state government?
My first real role was to audit all the continuing professional development hours for nurses and doctors and cosmetologists.
Cosmetologists too?
Oh yeah. It was
so there are state requirements related to that?
Absolutely. Anybody that had a state license through the Department of Professional Regulation, CPAs.
Right.
So I built programs to decide on who gets audited. Don't blame me if you get audited from ISBE. I don't do that work any longer. Right. But yeah,
I think they pull names out of a hat anymore to make those determinations, right?
I think the technology for that's come a long way from the old D-Base 4 days where you'd have to do a randomizer. But
Got it.
Yeah, so that was my first job. And then I ended up working in just communications at the Department of Professional Regulation. There was a large layoff in the state. They had nobody to talk to the media for that agency. Right. And so they asked me to, since I had a background in radio, hey, why don't you go talk to the reporters? And so that led me to a new career path. And you and I are a lot alike that we both are lifelong learners. And so anytime somebody gives me something to learn, I'm going to jump in and learn it to the best of my ability and then use that into the next iteration of my next layer of professional development, whatever I decide to do next.
So what then got you pulled into the education business specifically? I mean, besides working at the State Board of Ed, and I'm sure having that previous experience and around town here, you probably know where all the tunnels are and how to get around a little bit. I'm sure that's been helpful as you come back into this role.
The tunnels are changing a little bit, though.
Yeah, that's true.
With all the construction, it's a little bit different. So working in Springfield, coming to the State Board of Education, this was the last state agency I worked at before I left and went to a local school district. Okay. So from the State Board of Education, I was hired on to St. Louis Public Schools as their Chief Communications Officer. I was there for a few years in St. Louis. Still lived in Illinois, but commuted down every day.
I'm sure with that, most people are curious. Are you a Cubs or a Cardinals fan? That could really determine how the rest of this interview goes, just so you know, in terms of how that's answered. No, I'm just kidding. But you don't have to answer. That's okay.
So if I watch baseball, I would say I watch the Cubs.
Okay.
If I watch, I'm going to watch the Cubs.
We're going to let that slide then. That's all right. That's okay.
Sorry. And I know that was the first question you get whenever I first moved to Springfield.
Right.
For some reason, White Sox don't exist down here.
Oh, that's true. And this is kind of the dividing line, too, within the division, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you bet. So what was your first school position then?
So Chief Communications Officer at St. Louis.
St. Louis, that's
and
right.
then from there, I had been familiar with School District U46 from my days here at the State Board of Education. I remember at the Capitol, we would always refer to U46 because of its teacher mentor program that was an award-winning teacher mentor program. Demographically, it mirrored the makeup of the state at the time. Yeah. And so we would always point to U46 as an example. And so I really held that district in high esteem. And when I saw that they had an opening for the same role, Chief Communications Officer in School District U46, I applied and was selected to go to School District U46. And that lasted me for 15 years.
Right.
I had gone back to school and received my master's in business administration whenever I left ISBE. And so I walked into that new position with a master's in business and quickly started being thrown extra duties. Yeah. Suddenly I'm working on the budget, and then I'm working on our public accountability system. So every time I turn around, the superintendent would give me an additional set of responsibilities with a new title. So I ended up being a chief of staff for the former superintendent, Jose Torres. Yes. And when he left, the board didn't want to look for a superintendent. Yeah. They said, we have the staff here we want. We have the leader here that we want. And so they asked me to stay on and serve in the role of CEO.
Yep.
And I served in the role of CEO until I went back to school and got the superintendent credentials.
Excellent. So how long were you then in that position?
Almost 9 years as superintendent, which is different. I mean, that's pretty long for a district that's almost 40,000 kids.
And that's what I was going to reference here, because that is absolutely against the grain of what the national statistics show, right? Just for superintendents in particular, but you just look at larger systems for sure, you see a significant amount of turnover. I mean, look at the Rockford School District before Dr. Aaron Jarrett has taken over. They seem to be turning over superintendents quite a bit and then have now had stable leadership there for some time. But, you talked about yourself being a learner. Besides that, what do you think it was about the work that you were doing and what you were trying to do as a school leader that allowed for you to be there and be as successful as you were during that long stretch of time?
So I think it was the number one, having constant interaction with the Board of Education. So they had a high degree of trust in me next to the superintendent. Everybody knew that day to day I was when the superintendent wasn't there, that as chief of staff I would lead the day-to-day operations. And I was also very actively engaged at the state level. So you and I have known each other for several years because I'd be down here in Springfield a lot advocating on behalf of the school district.
Especially with the evidence-based funding bill.
Very active in the evidence-based funding formula, absolutely. And so the board did not want to make a sudden change. They didn't want to bring in somebody from the outside to change direction. They wanted to keep the team intact and keep going in that same direction. And so that's why they turned to me and asked me to lead lead that district at that time.
So how did you try to stay engaged with the board? What types of tactics, approaches? Obviously you can have meetings and do all of that regularly, but maintaining those relationships it takes intentional work, right?
All relationships take intentional work,
right.
And with boards is no exception. So I think a few things. I know a lot of superintendents do a weekly message to their board, and it's just meant only for their Board of Education. And I took a little bit of a different tact. I assumed that if my board needed to know it, then every employee in the school district needed to know it.
Yeah.
And so instead of giving the board a weekly message that was tailored just to them, I would come up my weekly message from the lens of if my board needs to know it, all employees need to know it. And I would send it out to all 6,000 employees and to the community if they wanted to read it as well. And the board liked that. The community seemed to like that. The employees certainly liked it. And it gave them the inside trader stuff, like what's going on within the organization, what's going on inside the school district.
So to make sure there was good transparency there amongst not only just what was actually happening, but the thought process behind all of that. Right?
Absolutely. Communication is key. And then having a really strong board president also helps a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, I survived through 19 different school board members in my time.
Sure.
And each one, I would have to say, there's several keys to the success of that. Number one is having a board that really commits to governance, to real governance through ISBE, that they do their self-evaluations, that they really recognize what their role is as a school board and practice that.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. The other is we had written agreements about how we would work together. That we posted on the website. They're out there for anybody to see. But the board knew that on any day-to-day matters, they could go to a staff member if needed, if like a parent called you or something like that as a school board member. But everybody knew that I would be informed of that conversation. And then we just had different layers of communication. So if a board member wanted research done, anything that took more than 15 minutes of time, they knew that that had to be brought up at a board meeting in public, and the whole board would have to give me direction to move that way.
I love the clarity of that.
And it was very clear, and it allowed for no surprises. I knew that I couldn't, I wouldn't let them be surprised by anything, and at the same time, they wouldn't let me be surprised.
Yeah.
And building that relationship was really key, and that's what I see a lot of the good leaders doing.
So one thing I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up, Tony, and I think it speaks well of you, particularly as a school leader of a system as large as U46 with 40,000 kids, that you may be most well known for is the way that you would engage with students on Twitter, particularly around snow days, which I just thought was terrific. So I'm just curious. One of the things I always wanted to ask you is, how did that kind of get started, and then you've rolled with that up to this point. Of course, you rolled with it year to year, and of course, where Elgin is located, you've got plenty of opportunities to deal with snow-related incidences, right? So
absolutely. So out of I really don't remember exactly how it started. The students
probably a kid got it started, right?
I'm sure. I mean, if you look at my Twitter account, most of the followers I have are former students in U46 that wanted to know first and foremost if there was a snow day.
Right.
But I got in the habit of responding. If kids asked for a snow day, I would always come back with some quick remark.
Oh yeah, or a meme or something.
Or something.
Whatever.
Absolutely. And so it ended up in this banter back and forth between me and students. And it grew my popularity among the students. So when I'd go to a high school or middle school, kids would want my autographs. They would want selfies. In their minds, that was having 10,000, 11,000 followers on Twitter is a big deal.
Yeah.
And so it was fun. It was
well, I liked in particular where your head in particular would end up on like the body of Hercules or whatever, ways that kids were trying to be really complimentary as much as possible to hopefully get that snow day from you.
It was sometimes complimentary and sometimes less than that. But there were a few times that it went a little bit over the top. But
you bet.
But no, the kids are great. It's like a lot of our great principals across this state. Our kids just want to know us.
Right.
They want to know us. And it doesn't mean that you have to act like a teenager. It just means that sitting down and having a conversation with a student over lunch, I know for a fact, has changed kids' lives.
Right.
At my going away party, this young lady came up to me and she said that I sat down and had lunch with her one day, and she was sharing with me an incident about bullying that happened to her. And I stopped the conversation, we grabbed our lunch, and I took her down to the counselor's office. And she said that one conversation saved her life. And educators have that power every single day in the relationships that we build with kids. Yeah. They don't even have to know us that well. Yeah. Just knowing us well enough to share what's in their lives and what's going on is meaningful.
Yeah, I love that. Being present in the moment and being willing to act if necessary.
yeah, I mean, our jobs are anything that gets us in front of kids every day is the best job in the world.
You bet. So let's turn to this position. What made you think that this is something you want to do? And of course, we do have to share that you've got quite a legacy here with your father serving as state superintendent just a couple of years ago. Sure. And I would guess that probably had something to do with your consideration for this role as well. But just curious about your thoughts.
So, back in 2003 or so, whenever I worked here before, when I was actually interviewed in the conference room under the photo of my father.
Yeah,
so
wow.
the wall of superintendents in the boardroom, and I was sitting there in this interview without the superintendent at the time knowing that my father's up on the wall behind him. And so I was interviewed under the watchful eye of my father twice for this job.
Right.
And it's, but yeah.
Nothing disconcerting about that at all.
No,
right?
no, it was actually, it's great. It is a wonderful thing to know that my father held this role. It's wonderful to know that we're sitting in the office where my father sat, 30 some years ago.
Yeah.
That's really, it is a legacy thing. It's not the exact reason why I went for this job.
Sure.
Really, back when I worked here before, both working in state government and then also working in the State Board of Education, it fueled my passion for public service. It fulfilled me in a way that even working in a local school district just did not.
So why do you think that is?
I think it has to do with being able to just expand your reach to have an impact on more people. So the difference between 40,000 students compared to 2 million students. Right. I'd love to take what I did in U46 and expand that and see how can we benefit, how can I use my time, talent, and energy to help 2 million students rather than 40,000. Yeah. And so somehow one of the things I'm trying to figure out, I'm still working on my 90 days of listening and learning, but I do know on the heels of this, something I have to do is figure out a way to be in the field regularly and visit schools regularly so that I still have that connection both with teachers and principals, but also with the students in schools.
Right, absolutely.
So
that goes into another thing that I'm curious about, Tony, just in terms of, in this position, obviously it's different than being, on the ground in a school day to day. So I'm just curious about, your approach from a leadership perspective. You want to be out, be present, be in relationship with educators, with kids. That's not always doable, obviously, but I'm just from a broad perspective, from that angle of things, and then just from your work day to day, what do you see yourself needing to do to be able to lead effectively in this role?
That's a really great question. And my answer today may change within the next, probably over the course of the next.
Well, it's all situational too,
years.
Right? It depends on what kind of is getting thrown at you.
It is. So coming in the first 30 days, certainly there's been, with the legislature in session, as I kind of joked about it earlier. I didn't mean that I shouldn't have made a joke about it, but it does take more time for care and feeding of those relationships. Those are obviously very important relationships to have. We know we have to pass a state budget, and we really certainly want a state budget that supports all of our public schools. We have the teacher pipeline work we want to get done, the early childhood work we want to get done. And that requires also relationships with adults here in Springfield. And so working towards those is obviously very, very important. But I think what you're going to see my style being is really trying to empower the staff here at the State Board of Education to see their role and their connection to kids in the classroom. Yeah. That's what really inspired me to want to come back here and give back. It was working here and knowing that the work I was doing actually made a difference in the lives of kids every single day. It was the first time when I worked at this agency that I would go home at night feeling fulfilled that I made a difference in a really positive way. Yeah. And I think every State Board of Education employee needs to go home feeling that exact same way. Right. Because the work we do, regardless of department, food and nutrition, fiscal services, it doesn't matter what your role is. At the end of the day, you're supporting kids. That's a fulfilling thing.
Well, and I've been in this position a long time and had an opportunity to meet a lot of the agency staff, and there's a lot of really good people here that are dedicated and wanting to do what's best for students. And sometimes it's not always perceived in that way just because of dealing with bureaucracy, and we all have to deal with that. And particularly those within the agency, we have the laws and the rules and things that we all have to work within. But by and large, we've got good people here that really do want what's best for schools and then the kids that they serve.
Absolutely. I mean, going back in time, knowing many of the past state superintendents, Chris Cook, obviously Rez Vasquez, who was here, Bob Schiller. I've known, most like you get to know all the Carmen Ayala, obviously. And they all will talk about the challenge of being both a compliance agency and making sure that all the mandates that schools are supposed to meet are being met, and then also the supports piece. And so one of the bigger conversations that I'll be having with the team here in the coming months is, how do we revisit our statewide system of support to make sure that we are best serving, as to the best of our ability, all school districts? And I mean school districts regardless of their label, and schools regardless of their label. I don't care if you're commendable, exemplary, targeted, or comprehensive. School improvement is school improvement, and we need to help schools figure that out.
Yeah, you bet. So as we kind of wrap things up here a little bit, Tony, if this is too much on the spot, I sure understand, and maybe you still need some time to flesh this out. But when you think about looking back on your time here in this position at the state board, and it is incredible opportunity and a really high office, obviously, that you have now. And me knowing you the way that I do, and you being a learner and thinking deeply about leadership and doing what's best for kids. When you reflect back on what this time will be and what you hope it to be, I mean, what are you hoping for yourself in this position, and what you hope to accomplish?
So I hate to duplicate some of the things I've already said. I think a few of the priorities that I've been pretty transparent about. Number one is expanding early childhood education. So if I can get through, hopefully 8 years is what my goal would be. Yeah. If I can get 8 years and see a great expansion of early childhood opportunities in this state, I'll feel successful. If we can rethink our statewide system of support and make it meaningful, I'll feel successful. Yeah. If we can continue to advocate for year-over-year increases in the evidence-based funding formula, I'll feel successful. Yeah. And
isn't it incredible what we've experienced so far? I mean, you and I both remember the days when if we had $100 million extra dollars, that felt like a gift. So the fact that we've got $350 million being put in year after year, that's pretty incredible.
The fact that the legislature passed that in 2017 was a saving grace for so many school districts across the state that would not have survived COVID without it.
Yeah.
I know our district, my former district, would not have made it through. Mm-hmm. I don't know how we would have made it through on the old GSA formula. Yeah. There's no way.
Right. Absolutely.
So, I mean, it's truly a wonderful thing. Yeah. And our legislators deserve a lot of credit for not only for passing it, but our governor and legislators deserve a lot of credit for continuing to fund it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, because there are obviously lots of demands for priorities of other things that people would like to get done, not just within education, because there are plenty of those, but also just across the state overall. There's still a lot of needs that we need to address. Yeah.
Well, so the other priority that I would say is where you'll see me spending a lot of time is around relationships. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it earlier. I do pride myself in building relationships with students, with my staff, and every place I've worked, building relationships with legislators and other organizations. And so you'll see me being really regularly engaged in all different communities to try to make sure that I'm uplifting the voice of the State Board of Education in every venue that I can.
Yeah, sure.
To me, the relationships and modeling positive relationships is a key.
Yeah, you bet. Well, Tony, I sure appreciate this opportunity to sit down and chat with you a little bit. And I'm sure as we move forward and maybe have other opportunities down the road, we'll get deeper in on some of these issues. But I just wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to get to know a little bit about you and your focus and leadership style and what people could expect. And I think we've got a lot of good things to be expecting and hopeful for moving down the road. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate the time.
My pleasure. So from two guys that have faces for radio as we do this video, right?
Yeah, the two guys between the ferns or whatever, or whatever that plant is.
That'll be a whole different type of video that maybe you can watch the recap at some point in time.
There we go.
We'll do that. But my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director for the Illinois Principals Association. Grateful to have with me Dr. Tony Sanders, State Superintendent of Schools, for this IPA talk. As always, if there's anything that IPA can do for you, you can check us out on the web at www.ilprincipals.org or call us at any time. Take care.